Hello, and welcome to the Be Purely Balanced podcast. I'm Dr. Crystal Couture, and today I'm here with Heather Vaillancourt. Heather has been an athlete and an avid outdoors person for her whole life. She's traveled the world and has lived in some unique places. Throughout her travels, she was fascinated by the way in which wellness was defined differently everywhere she went. Heather used these different interpretations to inspire her journey toward her own wellness path. Heather received bodywork for herself for many years. She was always intrigued by the field. As an inherently nurturing and intuitive person, she was drawn to the physicality, creativity, and problem solving that is involved with massage therapy. Her work has now become her driving force, and she continuously aims to help her clients reach their goals and optimal level of wellness. Hi, Heather.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So, why don't you tell us about your journey?
Yeah, so I have always been athletic, always been outdoorsy, but also have always been slightly accident prone. And so my experience with massage therapy came from the receiving end in the beginning. I had various injuries and accidents that kind of culminated to a point where I was at a pretty young age when I started to feel much older than I was. And I just sort of accepted that as my normal. I just thought that that's how things went. You accumulated aches and pains and you kind of just got over it. And so I had a knee injury that had me seeing a PT, and they had referred me to a massage therapist. And so when I was younger, in my head, I had it that massage therapy was you go to the spa, you have a super relaxing time, it's really nice and really lovely. But, that's all I knew about it. And so when I had been told, go see a massage therapist, I was kind of like, what? Why? I'm pretty relaxed. And so it was kind of my first exposure to the world of not just massage, but therapeutic massage. And so the ways in which it helped me perform better as an athlete, feel better overall, deal with compensation patterns I had built up in that short period of time of my life. It was such a game changer for me. It really changed my perspective.
Mm, wow. And so now in your travels, I'm really curious how you experienced different modalities of healing and also were introduced to them. So if you want to elaborate upon that a little bit, I'd love to hear the stories.
Yeah, sure. So I had right after college, which I had gone to up in Maine, I moved out west. So I was living in Colorado for a period of time, and it was this town called Durango, and it was really this beautiful mecca for anything outdoors. I mean, you had extreme sports, you had mild sports, but within that community, there were so many various healers that it was a pretty powerful community in that sense. So just across the road from where I was living originally, there were body workers, there were energy healers, which was sort of the first time that I was introduced to that modality. So it was kind of that work hard, play hard mentality, but there was that undercurrent of body work and various energy healings in that setting as well. And so from there, I had traveled around in New Zealand for a period of time and then lived in Australia for a period of time. And it was really just so inspiring to see, as somebody who's always been so nature inclined, there's something ingrained about the various modalities that people incorporate into their day-to-day and the practitioners and what they choose to use, and how it's so ingrained with the places where they are. There's almost that resonance of that natural energy that's kind of in those beautiful settings, and how practitioners sort of meld and form their practices to kind of encompass and channel that, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. That's so big, and that's something I'm super attracted to as well. So I really appreciate hearing your experience with sort of these ritualistic almost developments of one's own practice. And I love that this is something that's coming, more and more to our Western modern world.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. That's a beautiful shift. And I think, especially in Western culture, where so much of the guidelines have been dictated by insurance companies and medical practices, having this undercurrent of alternative health options is really coming to the forefront. And before, where it was kind of just a whisper in the background, I think a lot of folks are really determining what's best for themselves and their bodies outside of what doctors are recommending. But I think even within that, so many doctors are recognizing the power and the benefit that all of these alternative options have. So specifically with massage therapy, I've seen a shift taking place. So with a lot of insurance companies, you see acupuncture being covered, you see chiropractic being covered, and I think the next big step is going to be massage therapy being covered. And personally, in my practice, oftentimes what I'm seeing is clients who are on the verge of surgery, who are on the other end of surgery, who are dealing with injuries, and massage ends up being so helpful for them. I've had clients who, and not to pat myself on the back, I think so many massage therapists can report this as well. So many people who are signed up for surgeries end up backing off because they didn't realize, with these carpal tunnel syndrome symptoms that I'm feeling, this shoulder pain that gets released has such a big impact on that. I think people are having more of an awareness on their bodies and are finding the direction that they connect with most to resolve those issues.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's true that, once you find a practitioner in massage or whatever it is that the therapy that resonates with you, right? Once
Yeah,
you find a practitioner, I think that sort of understands your needs and can really facilitate, that body, mind, spirit, then really amazing stuff can happen. Um,
absolutely.
yeah, and I wanted to go into a little bit more detail. I've been thinking about this a lot lately about how, clients go in and they sort of get the confirmation from the doc, right? That they're going to be needing a surgery for whatever part of their body, right? And
Hmm.
it sort of becomes the end all be all. However, even if they need the surgery, I think that therapeutic intervention, therapeutic body work can be extremely helpful leading up to the surgery and to really help with the outcomes afterwards.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that has so much to do with the compensation patterns that have been built up prior to that surgical intervention. If again, using that carpal tunnel as a point of reference, the way in which people are going to change the way that they use their hands, are going to change the way in which they are writing, all of that builds up into these compensation patterns. And so if you build that up and you have the surgery, those patterns are still going to be ingrained in that tissue. And so if you have that surgical intervention, there are still dysfunctions that are present. And you're exactly right. I think those interventions leading up to surgery are such a great way to increase circulation to that area, just to prep the tissue and get it ready for surgery, and to work on breaking back down those compensations that have built up, because it's not an overnight cure, whether it be with one massage, whether it be with one surgery. Things take time to build up, and they take just as much time to break back down too. So I think that's a really great point that you bring up.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you started talking about compensatory patterns again, because I know you talked about that with your own story, but I think that's a really important point to note, is that we don't even know that we're building up these patterns, right? And
Exactly.
they could come from anything. We could, have like a light ankle sprain from a hike, and we start doing something weird with our hip or something like that. Then we keep doing something weird with our hip.
Hmm.
Um, and these patterns are our body seeking balance, right? They're our body seeking that homeostasis and wanting to do what's right to support us in that time. The problem is we keep them past when we need them.
Exactly, exactly. And that's such a great point. I think our bodies are such efficient, beautiful machines, and they will do everything they can to help us stay functional. And so, with that ankle sprain, it can be years in the making where that hip pain starts to rear its ugly head one day. And when it's so far disconnected, how many people make that connection? I think that's so common to not be able to trace it back, but the way in which you can trace that in your body as a manual therapist, I can sort of palpate those and get a sense of where dysfunction stems from. And that's not always the case. Sometimes there's no answer, and that's fine too. But our bodies have the ability to heal themselves, and sometimes they just need that facilitation. And I think that's where massage therapy can be so useful, is that it's allowing the body to reach that homeostasis in a much more functional way because of that manual intervention. So it's not me as a healer doing the work, it's being the facilitator to allow our bodies to function more optimally.
You put that beautifully, Heather.
Thanks.
Yeah. So your modality sort of gifted you your health back, right? And your youth
Yeah.
back.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What
Absolutely.
what does it gift you working with clients and being that facilitator?
On a personal level, I think as somebody who's always been, I would give somebody the shirt off of my back, I like just above and beyond, trying to be that helpful person. And so I think on a deeply personal level, being able to provide somebody with, at its simplest form, relief. And sometimes there are emotional transformations that take place. There's so much work within the manual realm that can sort of facilitate and open up a lot of emotional healing too. It's just on a daily basis the most rewarding work I could ever imagine doing. So I think that on its simplest form is kind of what keeps me engaged. But I think by having experienced so much of that myself, knowing what it feels like on the other end to have that transformation, and to not have expectations going into something, and realizing on a really fundamental level how it changed my life in such a positive way. I mean, that to be able to help people reach that conclusion on their own is, I'm so honored.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's so clear how passionate you are about this work.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Uh, yeah, just through your, the intonation in your voice, and it just really resonates through how passionate you are and how much you love the work that you're sharing with your clients. They're very lucky to have you.
Oh, you're so sweet to say that. Well, and I think that it's partially because I spent so much time in my early years traveling and kind of getting a sense of what I wanted to do and trying on different hats and seeing, like, well, I liked this about this job, I liked this about this job, but I didn't quite like these things so much. And it was so amazing, because in the back of my mind all along, because of the way it so positively impacted my life, massage therapy was something that I had been considering all along. And it just was never the right place at the right time. And since starting this journey, I've tried to tune into those signs more often. I think when things align the way that they're meant to, you gotta trust that process. And I think taking all those years to figure things out allowed me to, once I really gained some traction with massage therapy, to give it my all, because I knew from day one that it was right for me. But I didn't ever feel a sense of lacking, like, oh, I wish I had started traveling younger and doing all of that stuff. I think it was part of my process to get to where I am now by having taken care of all of those things that I had wanted to do previously. So it feels good to be getting my roots into the community that I'm in, and to be able to better serve them by just being wholeheartedly focused in this work.
Hmm. Absolutely. As you speak, I start to think about a couple of facets of massage therapy. One you sort of touched upon, and the other you elaborated a little bit. But the idea of emotionality and how that comes through as relief in sessions, and also sometimes release.
Mm-hmm.
I think massage can very often be physical in nature, and people can be seeking, that physical relief. But very often there's much, much more to the work that you share as a massage therapist. And I would love your input.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think, again, coming from that athletic background, we have this ability to train our muscles in a way that gives them a memory. So as we gear up towards a certain event, our muscles build that memory so that they can more effectively perform the duties that we're going to be asking of them. And just as we can do that in a positive manner with events that we're training for, I think it can develop in a negative way as well. And so oftentimes with the emotional component that I see is through various traumas, whether it be physical traumas, sexual traumas, emotional traumas, the way in which our body stores that information, it holds in a physical component. I think it gets bottled up somewhere. And even with people who have undergone various talk therapies, still have a physical component to it somewhere in their bodies. I think just as we deal with stress, our stress has to live somewhere. So often I see that in shoulders, but when there are other traumas, it can pop up anywhere, and it can be a really intense experience for the person who's on the table receiving the work, and especially if it's something that they haven't necessarily processed or dealt with outwardly. And so that emotional component that comes in can be, we're having a normal session, maybe we're talking, and all of a sudden there's a disconnect, kind of that glazed over look, or a sudden triggering of a memory that comes up, kind of like a light switch goes off, and somebody's like, oh my gosh. And so that, when that component takes place, whether it's vocalized or whether it's non-vocalized, you can sort of just get a sense of that shift that takes place in a person. And whether it's an outward awareness that they have that there's something going on, or if it's recognition in their bodies, but maybe still that disconnect in their mind, I think that area is a really, really interesting place to be. And as a practitioner, I'm not a therapist. I don't have certifications in that realm. So it's important to hold that space for that person, listen if it's something they want to talk about, but also developing the skills through different bodywork techniques to provide a place where that emotion can get processed in that physical way. And so, actually, this upcoming week, I'm heading up to Montreal to take the next Up Ledger course. I am taking the somatic emotional therapy course, which is part of Up Ledger's craniosacral therapy program. And so that whole course is all about dealing with that emotional component to tissue release. So that is, I mean, I can speak to it slightly now, but after next week, it's going to be in the forefront of my mind. So that's going to be an exciting venture.
Oh, yeah. I love the sensitivity that you brought to this topic. And I really think that people aren't sure, what's happening sometimes when emotion comes up, and they're not sure if it's okay to sort of feel that emotion when they're on the table, and that's a safe place to release the emotion. And I think, in most cases, working with a practitioner that one is comfortable with, it's a safe space. It's coming up for a reason, right?
Absolutely. And that's the one recommendation that I would make to anybody who's looking for any sort of body work is make sure that you have a comfortable connection with the practitioner that you're seeing, because you want somebody who's going to really listen to your needs and who is on the same page and makes recommendations as needed, but really keeps your goals in mind. And I think as a society who's sort of emotionally repressed in so many ways, you want to have a space where if there is that emotional component that gets released, you want somebody who's going to be there and be supportive, because otherwise it can just form more traumas, or it can push things a little deeper in. If you don't have that comfortability, I think that can be so counterproductive. And who wants to be on a table experiencing something at their core that's incredibly profound and not feel a connection there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
On the contrary, when they do have that connection and they share that as a practitioner and a client, then what's possible, right?
Oh, it's amazing. It's amazing. And as I said, I'm not a therapist, and massage therapists who have that dual credential, that's amazing, and that's going to be some powerful work. But what is really great in tight-knit communities is that we have a really strong network of support. So somebody who can take on that role, who I believe is a strong practitioner in that realm, can be the next recommendation that I make for that client. So, supporting them in that capacity in the best way that we as massage therapists can, but then offering at the end, gently, not trying to push them in any sort of direction, but a gentle suggestion of, it seems like there was a lot of emotion coming up. I have somebody who would be really great for you to work with. This is their contact information. Just kind of giving them the tools that they need if they feel it's right for their journey to pursue it farther, but letting them know they have options.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the gentle nudges that you offer, and how you really, it sounds like, allow the client to sort of be wherever they are and meet them in that space, and then allow them to really guide the session through their body, mind, and spirit, to a place that is so beneficial for them.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's funny because in the practice, so much of the focus tends to be deep tissue work. So I think having that gentleness inherently built into that work is so important, because if people came in and I was just dropping elbows day in, day out, I think even with a gentleness there, that deep, intense work, it's a lot. And so you have to kind of walk that line and really hear and respond to any signs and signals that there's change taking place, because the body can only process so much at any given time. And if somebody comes in, wants a super intense deep tissue hour, but then has emotional response somewhere in there's got to be that balance. And so that's where having that ability to kind of tune in and really listen and pick up on all the subtleties can be so important with any practitioner.
Absolutely. What would you say are a few tips that you would give to someone who is seeking, holistic health practitioner?
So I would suggest almost interviewing them. I would make sure to come up with a list of questions. What are your certifications? What is the primary focus of your business? Things like that are going to help kind of match or not match what your goals and your wants are of any practitioner. And then I think you never know until you're actually on the table. I think it's beautiful how every body worker I've ever come into contact with has their own style, has their own approach, has their own working philosophy. And I've met some really amazingly talented practitioners who just naturally get it. And I've met some really wonderful people whose philosophies I am on the same page with. But when I get on the table, there's that disconnect in the skill set. So it's important to kind of twofold talk to them, but also give it a try, see what a session feels like. Worst case scenario, it's not a good fit and you continue on, you get some good body work, and it's still a good day.
That's
But yeah, I think that conversation element is so important.
Yeah, I think there's an aspect, where people have to sort of tap into the courageousness that's within them,
Mhm.
right? To ask the questions that they really want to ask, and also tap into what their intuition is guiding them to do.
Absolutely. And I say this of doctors as well. When clients come in and they say, well, the doctor's recommended surgery. Well, did you talk to any other doctors? Has anybody else given their opinion on the matter? And I tell this to my clients too. I always like to give them options. Here's what my 2 cents are, but feel free to check in with another practitioner. Feel free to see another practitioner. I think it's so important to see what other people's opinions are, because everybody brings something really incredible to the table, and we all have such different perspectives that by seeing what other people have to offer, you can make that informed decision about what's right to you and that gut feeling. And that gut feeling, I think, is more powerful than anything else. We all have that inherent intuition in us, and that internal physician who kind of raises that red flag when we're feeling pain. And if it's pain we can live with, okay, we can move on from that. Or if it's pain that's like, this is urgent and we need to check this now, we all know what sits right with us. And I think that so often we're taught to disregard that gut feeling and to trust the system. And maybe it's just that cynical side of myself, but I really do think that everything should be taken with that grain of salt, because what one person tells you, the other person might tell you the complete opposite. And so sort of doing the research and weighing out the options, and in the end going with your gut.
Mm. I think it's really important, especially for older clients that have been taught a lot about authority. Our
Mhm.
generation, I feel like, fights authority a little bit, but you know the older generation, I can really see them, in a space where doctor says this and they do this no matter what, and they don't realize that there are other options. That word that the doctor has becomes the end all and be all. And I'm
Mhm.
not saying the doctor's wrong, because in many cases they may be right, but it is important, I think, for the client to step into the responsibility that they know their body better than anyone else. They know their emotions better than anyone else, which gives them access to something that, the doctor, we as practitioners, no one else has, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh my gosh. I love that. And I think that's so true. I think that's so true. And I think that, like you were saying, generationally, when you look at the science behind things too, several generations ago, they were being told that smoking was healthy. And so the science changes and the science evolves and the information evolves and our access to it shifts. And so now we're in this age of almost over information, where WebMD is something that is probably used and abused. So we have so much more resources at our disposal that previous generations didn't. I mean, there almost had to be that just trust wholeheartedly in whatever whoever you were seeing was telling you, because that's all you had to go on. So I think in that sense, we're so fortunate to have all of the options that we have at our disposal. But it can also be overwhelming sometimes too, because there is that mountain of research that we can delve into and find everything out. And I think, again, that's where that balance of, okay, being informed, but also listening to our bodies and balancing those two to make the decisions that are right.
Mm, absolutely. I love that you use this word, inherent intuition. Some people come in and say, "Oh, I'm not intuitive at all," right?
Mm-hmm.
And I find myself very often then wanting to facilitate that relationship between the client and their own self
Yep.
so that they can access the intuition, so they can access the part of them that knows the way.
Yeah. Well, and it's so funny too, in that context, the messages that we tell ourselves are the ones that we end up believing. So if somebody's telling themselves day in, day out, well, I'm not an intuitive person and I can't tell when this happens. If those are the messages that you're playing on repeat in your head, those are gonna be the things that your body believes. And so I think that the language that we use to talk to ourselves is really important too, because the more gentle we are with ourselves and the more we can sort of open up our minds and our perspectives, the more we can tap into that sensibility internally. And I
Absolutely.
think that when it comes to um, especially pain and injury, so often when people are talking about an injured shoulder or an injured hip, it's, oh, this shoulder's been a problem forever. It's so angry. And I always try to sort of take the ball that they're passing me and kind of reshape it a little bit and pass it back. And I think sort of practicing that language with them, and without having it being a teaching moment necessarily, but having it be kind of, this is what you're giving me and this is what I'm going to offer back to you. And by the end of the session, see how that changes the way that they're talking about themselves. I think that can be powerful as well.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Before we close today, I would just love to ask, massage is such a personal experience for folks and the therapists as well. So I would just love to ask your opinion on how the work of massage, the work that you share, the body work, really impacts the collective consciousness.
Yeah, so I think that it's massage therapists have this beautiful place in the world where they can pull from this whole spectrum of different modalities. So we have this opportunity to provide Reiki healing in a session or other various forms of energy work, and then getting in tune with that interpersonal sort of realm. I think within all of that, we are not so much healers as just kind of facilitators, kind of channeling that universal energy and putting it out into individuals and kind of helping people connect with that in that sense.
Mm,
And
that's a beautiful, beautiful sentiment and a beautiful way for us to conclude today. But before we do, I want to ask, how can folks get in touch with you? Where are you located? All that good stuff.
yeah, so my office is here in Peterborough, New Hampshire, and I can be reached via my website, which is monadnocktherapeuticbodyworks.com, or my email is heather@monadnocktherapeuticbodyworks.com. But yeah, and for anybody who has questions about what modalities are, um, if they're looking for something specific and they're not sure where to go or who to ask questions to, even if people don't come to my office, I'm happy to serve as a resource because I love this work so much. Even if people aren't coming to see me, that is so fine. I just want to make sure that they're getting the work that they need.
Oh, Heather, your spirit is so big. Your heart's so open.
Oh, thank you.
Is there anything else you'd like to add before we close today?
No, I just want to thank you for putting on such a great podcast. I've been catching up with your archives, and it's so great to have a platform where other practitioners and general public can come and listen to what everybody has to offer. And it's really encouraging to hear that there's this alternative movement taking place in the way that this can shape our Western medicine approaches. I think it's just such a beautifully progressive process.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Thank you for being with me today.
Thank you for having me.